So I'm a big fan of character-driven storytelling, whether it be in movies, music, history, or anything else. I'm extremely interested in trying to understand someone's actions and motivations. But what happens when a character transcends their medium and becomes something else, a logo, a brand, or even a meme completely removed from the original context in which it existed? American culture is defined by the stories we tell, the things we spend money on, and the characters we see ourselves reflected in. In today's video, I wanted to take a look at 3 iconic characters that each reflect American culture in their own unique way. I'm interested in seeing how their character traits and perceptions have evolved on the path to cultural domination. Do they still have distinct personalities, or are they just American iconography? How well do they reflect our culture as a whole? Why are there gangster, SpongeBob, and Looney Tunes edits? All of the burning questions of the day. I'm not saying these are the most iconic American characters of all time, but instead just a collection of a few figures who represent different cultural spaces. Mickey Mouse is weird. He's certainly the most iconic character we're talking about today, and I would argue he's the most iconic American character, period. But the question is, can you describe Mickey Mouse's personality? How much can you really even tell me about him? He first debuted all the way back in 1928 in the now iconic Steamboat Willie cartoon. Despite this technically being the first Mickey Mouse cartoon to debut, there is another one called Plain Crazy that was created first but didn't come out until later. That version of Mickey is a much ruder and less universally appealing character than his popular perception today would suggest. Here is an off-putting clip from Plain Crazy where Mickey Mouse unconsensually kisses Minnie. As Mickey's popularity exploded in the 1930s, he was turned into a more straight man character that reacted to the crazy situations around him. So much so that Donald Duck was created as a rambunctious foil to the all-American mouse. Someone go check on what Donald was doing in 1943. As Mickey earned his place in the hearts of American children all across the country, he needed to embody more fundamentally American values and morality. Walt Disney immediately started building the up-and-coming stars merchandise catalog, one that frankly hasn't stopped building ever since. I would argue that Mickey Mouse's branding has had a much bigger role in building his popularity than any media he's ever been in. His vague character traits allowed Mickey to be anything. Symphony conductor, a pirate, even a Jedi. Just say the word. Mickey is whatever you want him to be. There have been 121 theatrically released Mickey Mouse shorts, with all but 3 of them having been released between 1928 and 1953. This more Boy Scout version of Mickey Mouse made him a much more palatable character for small children. But do we still have room for black and white characters like Mickey Mouse? I mean, look at Elsa, certainly the most popular of Disney's modern characters. That's a story that wouldn't ever have been told during Mickey's prime. Morally gray anti-hero characters are becoming more popular even in children's media. Disney made an origin film for Cruella de Vil, a quite literally black and white villain from a classic Disney movie. The new Magic Kingdom expansion is even rumored to include a villain land. I mean, look at Luke Skywalker, another character that's owned by Disney. Even the most iconic classic heroes get revisited today in a morally complex way. I'm not going to make the mistake of having my own opinion on The Last Jedi. Whatever you think, I agree with it. Thinking about my own experience as a young person, I only really remember Mickey as a proper character from Fantasia, the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, Epic Mickey, and Kingdom Hearts. Mickey's just much more of a cultural figure. My first birthday party, which wasn't even in the United States, was Mickey Mouse themed. Even just going to Disney is a cultural touchstone for both American families and families all across the world. I'm Floridian, I go to Disney fairly often, and I cannot tell you how much Portuguese I hear. It's always people being like, "Vamos tirar foto no castelo, olha lá o Mickey." Unlike other cartoon characters like Bugs Bunny or Fred Flintstone, Mickey became a brand first and a character second. Now let's take a look at some other iconic American characters and how they've evolved over time.
Barbie, you're beautiful. You make me feel my Barbie doll is really real.
Barbie is an interesting example of how to reverse engineer a character, starting with a toy that becomes an iconic brand and eventually building the character traits out from there. The famous doll debuted at the Toy Fair in New York City all the way back in 1959. She was created by Ruth Handler, the co-founder of Mattel.
Listen to Remco's Baby Laugh a Lot.
At the time, little girls mostly played with baby dolls, a practice meant to help these young children develop their motherly instincts, as weird as that sounds. Handler saw a vacuum that she could fill, an opportunity to give girls a positive representation of womanhood. On a 1956 trip to Switzerland, Handler's teenage daughter Barbara noticed a doll that caught her eye. This Bild Lily doll was based off of a comic strip character from a German magazine, Bild Zeitung. A friend of mine who's German tried to help me learn that pronunciation, and I feel like I let them down. Funny enough, it wasn't intended to be a children's doll and was sold in bars, tobacco shops, and adult toy stores. This reflects the comic strip's fairly risque content. Ruth would name the doll Barbie after her daughter. A large part of Barbie's cultural presence has been related to her many occupations. I've found that Barbie's latest career at any given time is a great indicator of the notable cultural discourse of the era. The original Barbie debuted in 1959 with the title Teenage Fashion Model Barbie, and was immediately distinct from the other dolls of the era due to her mature appearance.
It was the start of the fall semester, and Barbie, the famous teenage fashion model doll by Mattel, made plans for almost every weekend.
It took only 1 year for Barbie to go from fashion model to fashion designer. In a case of very outdated overgeneralization, 1963 saw the introduction of Career Girl Barbie.
All right, Miss Bates. We'd like to try to find out how determined a career girl you are. Now, if you'd please answer these questions. Do you feel that some girls have too much talent and ability to waste on a home and children?
Yes, I think many girls do. Some girls have a great deal to offer, and they certainly don't make any contribution to the business world, sitting home with their children or cooking dinner for their husband.
Go on, Miss Bates.
Well, many talented girls deserve a better life than that. They need that feeling of independence, of competition that they don't get at home. And they deserve the luxuries that they can buy with the money they earn.
Would you give up your career if the right man proposed?
No, I wouldn't. My career means too much to me.
Not even if your dream Prince Charming were the man?
I haven't met him. I don't think I'd give up my career even so.
The term career girl was meant to signify a woman whose main priority is to have a successful professional life, as opposed to being a homemaker as had been expected in that time. This term is understood to be pretty demeaning today, and rightfully so if you ask me. This attempt to create a one-size-fits-all Barbie for working women in general is pretty funny in retrospect. Astronaut Barbie was introduced in 1965, beating the moon landing by a whole 4 years. NASA better catch up. It would take 20 years after the introduction of Astronaut Barbie for Sally Ride to become the first American woman to go to space, though a Russian woman by the name of Valentina Tereshkova beat Barbie by 2 years. Believe it or not, Barbie went to space before there was a black Barbie doll. That wouldn't happen until the introduction of Christie in 1968. Followed by a line of fully diverse Barbie dolls in 1980. In keeping with the yuppie culture of the 1980s, 1985 saw the introduction of CEO Barbie. Now the transition was complete from the vaguely demeaning career girl Barbie to the top of the food chain. At times, Barbie's careers have been more of a goal to aspire to rather than a reflection of the current reality. A Pew Research study found that there were 0 women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies in 1995, a whole 10 years after the introduction of CEO Barbie, a number that has grown to 10.6% in 2024, showing that there's still a long way to go. In keeping with that theme, Barbie also saw the introduction of Barbie for President in 1992, a doll that has modernized for every election since, apart from 1996 for some reason. The reason I did such a deep dive on the different iterations of Barbie through the years was to emphasize that Barbie has always been meant to reflect the general public. You can see yourself in her and assign to her whatever attributes you want. But what is Barbie's personality? What are the character traits that were established in the Barbie canon, and what do they say about American culture?
She's every girl's best friend. She's been a superstar for more than 40 years. It's Barbie. starring in her first feature-length motion picture, Barbie in the Nutcracker.
Mattel started producing animated Barbie movies that inserted the famous doll into well-known stories and folktales, starting with 2001's Barbie in the Nutcracker. Despite all of the progress to establish Barbie as a working woman instead of just a fashion doll, these films chose to stick to traditional Disney-like stories, with Barbie often cast in the role of a princess. These films are pretty explicitly geared towards small children, and thus Barbie isn't that complex of a character in them. Much like Mickey Mouse, she was a person of good moral character who happened to be pretty good at most things. There's a very interesting New York Times story by Sarah Barr where she goes over all of these films and even interviews Kelly Sheridan, who played Barbie in 28 different installments. Sheridan described her character to Barr as kind, clever, brave. Barbie was flawless. She could do no wrong. Barbie sales fell by a jaw-dropping 20% between 2012 and 2014, and Elsa surpassed the iconic doll as the best-selling girls' toy. Recall what I said earlier about Mickey Mouse in relation to Elsa. Was Barbie going to be another mid-century relic that had no place in the modern-day culture apart from being iconography? Barbie's many career endeavors didn't stop some people, and parents in particular, from dismissing the doll as promoting outdated notions of a woman's worth being tied to her physical appearance. 2016 saw the introduction of Barbies of various body types, complete with the hashtag #TheDollEvolves, which seems awfully late to try to reflect the general population, especially when your product is one that people are supposed to see themselves in.
You've been making women feel bad about themselves since you were invented.
I think you said the wrong way around.
You represent everything wrong with our culture.
I thought that the Barbie movie did an excellent job at introducing some new and interesting ideas to a classic character that still felt true to what the character represented. Barbie was a one-dimensional doll, quite literally living in a dream house, who we get to see experience genuine human emotions for the first time. She starts off as a blank slate, and we see her be confronted with the real world and its complicated problems, where she grows tired and cynical, yet after it all, she decides to stay there, because to be human is to experience hardship and persevere. What I'm saying is we need to see Mickey Mouse have a John Wick arc. So I just realized what that implies for Pluto. Sorry, buddy. Superman was created in 1938 by two Jewish teenagers named Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. From the beginning, the Man of Steel was a perfect combination of old and new. Siegel and Shuster took elements from the popular adventure heroes of the time to create the first real superhero. Superman's reception in popular culture has been an interesting parallel to both Mickey Mouse and Barbie. Superman and Mickey are both Boy Scouts whose simple optimism and morality feel somewhat out of place in today's culture, while Superman and Barbie are both the quintessential mid-century idealizations of their respective genders. Unlike Mickey Mouse, Superman never evolved to become a brand above all else. While he certainly has a lot of merchandise, he's still a strongly defined character, one whose portrayals increasingly ground him in an old-fashioned, all-American sense of optimism. A character whose greatest effort isn't in summoning his strength, but rather in the incredible discipline it takes to restrain it. Ironically enough, the definitive incarnation of the Man of Tomorrow is nearly 50 years old. Almost 2 years before the United States even entered the Second World War, Siegel and Shuster published a small comic strip in Look magazine titled How Superman Would End the War. This magazine offers a quick look at the young men behind the Man of Steel. Co-fathers of this amazing character are Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, both under 30. As boyhood friends in Cleveland, Siegel and Shuster dreamed of what they would do if they were the world's strongest men. Superman is an extension of their dream, and proof that Americans still like their fantasy raw. Listen to that wholesome all-American tale. In the story, Superman effortlessly breaks through the European theater, destroying Nazi war machines in the process. He then reaches Adolf Hitler and tells him, "I'd like to land a strictly non-Aryan sock on your jaw, but there's no time for that." He then goes to Moscow, picks up Joseph Stalin, and instead of taking justice into his own hands and punishing these two brutal dictators himself, he takes them both to the League of Nations to get a fair trial. Patrick Ryall has a great series of articles called Superman vs. Bigots, where he takes a look at the many times the Big Blue Boy Scout has put people with prejudice in their place. He has a fantastic line in his piece about how Superman would end the war that reads, "Hey, you know who didn't like the stories about a Jewish created hero easily putting an end to Hitler's career? Those Nazi types." The Nazis, of course, being Nazis, made a series of disgusting anti-Semitic remarks about Siegel and Schuster. Joseph Goebbels is even said to have exclaimed, "Superman ist ein Jude." With the United States officially entering the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Superman became a more patriotic figure. The comic book industry boomed during the war years as young Americans looked towards fiction for hopeful portrayals of American values at a time of massive cultural upheaval. The black and white nature of these stories provided an escape from the complex questions of the time. The mild-mannered Clark Kent, whose heroism stemmed from true compassion, allowed regular people to see themselves in this new American myth. A figure who simultaneously eases our fears and gives us something to hope for. Even with Superman's moral compass, it's hard to do the right thing if you're not properly informed. Staying up to date with events around the world can be difficult, especially when we try to take our own biases into consideration. That's why I've been using Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that combines news from around the world in one place so you can compare coverage. For every news source, you can see if they have a political bias, how reliable the reporting is, and who owns them. They even have a blind spot feed that highlights news that is being disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. Ground News lets you see who's funding each publication, compare coverage, and think critically about the information that you consume. You can go to groundnews.com/Andre Dutra or use code Andre Dutra at checkout to get 15% off of your subscription and stay updated with the world around you. Thanks again to Ground News. Following the war, Superman was sanitized to fit the black and white morality of mid-century American life, and with this came certain drawbacks. In a 1995 essay titled The Role of Superman in American Culture, 1938 to 1955, Elaine Warely writes, "A conservative at heart, Superman was avidly anti-revolutionary both at home and abroad, narrowly defining justice as the maintenance of order and preservation of the status quo. The Superman comics avoided or greatly oversimplified the most controversial aspects of American life. Attempts to deal intelligently with issues such as race, gender, or American imperialist practices could have shattered the nationalist consensus the comic was attempting to create in the minds of its readers. I tell this story to emphasize that from the beginning, Superman always represented an idealized version of America at its best, with all of the positives and negatives that come attached to that. This man, who is simultaneously an all-American kid from Kansas and a refugee, the strongest of us, but also the most restrained. Superman became a symbol not because he lacks character traits, but because his personality and what he stands for are so universal. Superman doesn't hide his face when he's being a superhero. Instead, he changes his posture, his demeanor, and physical appearance when he becomes Clark Kent.
Lois, there's something I have to tell you. I'm really... I was, at first, really nervous about tonight.
People, for the most part, aren't trying to figure out Superman's identity because they don't expect him to be anything other than Superman. Why would the perfect, idealized man, free from obligations, choose to live a regular life? Choose to be human? It's the same decision that was made by Barbie, to live life, to experience emotions and hardships, to work, to laugh, to suffer, all of these things that come together and make us people, these things that build characters up from more than what they were on paper. A character as altruistic as Superman does feel outdated today, but that's just part of who he is. James Gunn recently revealed the first photo of David Cornsweet in costume for the upcoming Superman film, and much has been said about this costume. But there's one thing that I really appreciate. He is wearing the trunks. Yes, the trunks are a bit goofy, but so is Superman. He's wearing a bright red and blue costume. The whole thing is a little bit ridiculous, but that's why it works. It's earnest, and if you ask me, you have to commit to the earnestness of it in order to properly portray Superman. The most iconic characters in our culture tend to be the ones with the most universal characteristics and appeal, but that doesn't inherently make them lesser characters. By looking at three seemingly unrelated characters such as Mickey Mouse, Barbie, and Superman, we can examine what characteristics we consider to be inherent in American culture. Though I mainly grew up in the US, I am originally from Brazil, and going back there, I had a lot of culture shock in regard to what American characters were most popular there. I was really surprised to find out how big Ben 10 and especially Woody Woodpecker were. This got me wondering about what are the most popular American characters in different countries, so I would love to hear from you on that. Whether you're in the US or abroad, what do you think of when you hear iconic American character? What comes to mind? Whether that be something like a brand or a cartoon or some film character, I am curious, so let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I have been so happy with the success of the channel, and I really appreciate every single person who watches. If you enjoy the content, then please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting on the video. If you want to be extra generous, you can even become a YouTube member or support me on Patreon. Also, thank you to our sponsor, Ground News. Make sure to use code Andre Dutra for that. And once again, thank you so much for watching. I will see you later.